So the first thing you're going to do is boost revenue. First place to look there is in pricing. You really have to be strategic and tactical to optimize pricing. We interviewed David Anderson of Colonial Chemical about a month ago, and he gave some great insights around pricing in a specialty surfactant business. So I encourage you to check out that video. Another thing to look at in pricing is really focus in on the tier 2 and tier 3 customers. They're often buying smaller volumes at higher prices, and you should look at improving your penetration in those tiers. Watch out for costs to serve those segments. They can be a little pricey to serve below the gross margin line, but in terms of improving your customer mix and getting average pricing up, that is a great place to look. Don't be afraid to fire your customers with price. If they're not willing to pay what you think the value is you're offering, maybe the market is sending you a signal about your product mix, you can fire those customers by raising price. You may, in some cases, be surprised with the customers that stick around at the higher price. Now, to be good at all these things, you really have to study your customers. You have to study the market, be a student of your markets and your customers, and have a process. Invest in a process for doing this. Don't leave this up to the individual whims of your salespeople or your distribution channels. This is an absolutely strategic function that needs to be managed very actively. Second thing is volume, right? You're going to boost your volumes if you can to get plant utilization up over 90% in surfactants and chemicals in general. Plants tend to make decent money over 90% utilization. You get much below 80 and you're in real trouble. So, and you can look at ways to boost volume and even boost effective capacity other than just investing in more capacity. Things like product line simplification, improving yields, improve quality by decreasing rework, right? A plant's a one-way street, right? The raw materials come in through the back door, you process them, you send the products out, and they never come back. That's very important in terms of boosting overall capacity and utilization. So that's revenue. Second place, reduce cost. First place to look is raw materials. Always pretty much the biggest cost item for a surfactant manufacturer. And so you're going to do your best to create competitive supply conditions for as many of your key raw materials as possible. So you really must work diligently there because that's going to be your best leverage. In many cases, your only leverage to get the best raw material prices. When you've taken cost out of above the line, right, in your raw material manufacturing costs, then look below the line at SG&A. Make sure you're lining up your SG&A costs with the gross margins that are generated by the various product lines. If you're spending a lot of money, let's say, on technical service against customers or markets that don't value that, you need to take cost out of the SG&A line, either put it somewhere else or put it outside of the company in its entirety. And this takes a lot of discipline. The best companies are reviewing this continually and at least formally once per year in terms of looking at all the SG&A, where it's driven, where it's allocated in terms of business lines, product lines, markets, and figuring out where there is a misalignment there. Another thing you can do is optimize the business mix. So this is not necessarily boosting revenue or taking out cost, but when you look at the business mix, are you too dependent on one or two customers? Are you too dependent on one market? Do you have exposure there, risk exposure to customers or markets that you should really be looking at diversifying away from? And finally, are you taking in recurring annual revenue, or is your business more project-based? So, for example, did you have one or two good years where a couple of big enhanced oil recovery projects were driving your revenue? If so, you really need to look at the recurring revenue base and try and push it into more of a recurring model, less of a project model. And finally, if you can, build a moat around your business, right? It could be a technology moat, a patent moat, or just simply a know-how moat, which again, the knowledge content there of the business is pushing it away from a commodity model into a specialty model. And at least in the public markets, as we've discussed a number of times in this podcast, the value of the business is going to be greater. So I hope you have found this useful. Some of it may have been preaching to the choir. I know some of these things, though, you may not have looked at for a number of years. Thanks again for listening.